Hello, welcome once again to Cityscope. I'm your host, Jeff Pearson. Cityscope is a show that really focuses on city government and things happening in cities and how that can be replicated all over the state of West Virginia. Today we have a really special guest to talk about something very unique to Charleston and unique in a lot of places, but really unique in our town and how it may be happening other places, but we're not really quite sure. Maya Ross, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
That was a great intro, right?
Yes, it was
we're
perfect.
Not quite sure. I mean,
yeah.
So we'll get into like how many radio stations like this, but we'll get into that first. I want to talk about you.
It's a lot.
I bet. Okay,
yeah.
So maybe not so unique, but also very unique in some ways. Before we always get into the person that's with us, then what they're here for. So we always talk about, because this is a show about Charleston, we always ask, what was your first memories of Charleston, whether you're from here or not? And you mentioned earlier, you're not from Charleston, but Tays Valley.
Correct. So. I grew up in Tays Valley. I was actually born in South Charleston. We lived there till I was about 5 years old and then moved to Tays Valley.
Okay.
And so I grew up in Tays Valley and was there, but we came into Charleston a lot for going shopping at the mall. You know, we would come here for different big events, of course, regatta, when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And so Charleston was just this really big, huge place that even when I first started learning how to drive, I could never navigate the one-way streets. Everything is a one-way street in Charleston.
Yeah.
But it was just always this very big city with all these things happening when I was growing up. And then in my teenage years, I was coming here to go to local band shows at places like Common Grounds. So I got to see different parts of Charleston that I wasn't used to as a kid, and it started to feel more like my city.
It's interesting you mentioned, of course, nice regatta plug. As this show will air, we'll probably be in the midst of regatta 2023. But you mentioned something that was really instrumental in a lot of the music scene at that time was Common Grounds, which I wasn't around for that. I actually was in Columbus for a little bit and missed that part. So tell me a little bit about Common Grounds, because what I've heard about it is pretty impressive.
There was a huge local band scene in not only Charleston, but the surrounding areas as well. We had one in Hurricane, Winfield had one, Polka had one. All the different schools had this growing local band scene in the world of alternative music.
Right.
And that really wasn't something that we had a huge place for here. We had no alternative radio station that was playing that music. Basically, we just had MTV and what ways that we could find that music, because the internet was very lacking for us at that time too, in the late 80s, early 90s. And so all of these bands just kind of grew and started forming, coming out of that Seattle sound and everything. Local band shows started popping up. And bands would come from different areas, different schools, and we started this kind of very cool group of kids, and we all knew each other. We traded mixed tapes and mixed CDs with each other to share music. Common Grounds was a very pivotal place for that, all of that was going on at the time. It started out on the Five Corners, and it was a coffee shop, all ages coffee shop, and it's where I first got introduced to Crazy Jane. And fell in love with Crazy Jane. So you had that going on, this really cool space that our parents actually felt okay with us going to. It was kind of like our bar, but without alcohol and things. We had tea and coffee. They outgrew that space very, very quickly. It then moved over to Summer Street. What is now actually Short Story Brewing was the old Common Grounds. And that's where all of us kids would come together and we would hear, you know, all these great local bands. Again, it was just a time for all of us to see each other, because it's not like it is now where you have Facebook and you can communicate all the time. That was our way to see each other.
I think it's important too to remember that, again, no internet, no Facebook. These local bands didn't have that kind of network that they have now.
Correct.
So playing live was about it.
And you had that opportunity to give these very rudimentary created tapes and CDs of their music, just recordings they would make with just a tape player in the room. You would give that to people, and that's how people knew about your band. So it was a very different world.
And you out of the Common Grounds, again, I wasn't here for some of that, but you had bands like Crazy Jane, Mother Nang, Rasta Rafiki. Am I mentioning?
Rasta Rafiki didn't really play in that realm. This was more, that was a lot of the earlier years of things.
Okay, the Levy.
Yeah, so you had like Walt Flanagan's Dog. That's where 69 Fingers. And bands like that came from. You had bands like Down to None. You had the Pooh Rins. You had Una Panuna Bancas. All these different bands are playing, and Freak Tent was one that was a common person, a common band that was playing.
And I think just a general statement about music in Charleston. It's amazing. People are often impressed about our local music scene because of things like Common Grounds and the Empty Glass, where we cultivated these local musicians that are just, it's incredible, especially for a size of a town that we have.
It really is. I was actually in a meeting today of some local arts groups, and we were talking about the amazing talent that we have just here in Charleston and kind of our surrounding area. Yeah. All these musicians that are next level musicians. And we're blessed to have them playing the Empty Glass, Sam's Uptown Cafe, you know, and it's just this very cool thing. And there's so much talent that WTSQ is a place you can hear most all of those bands, and I love that.
I think that's a nice segue. Let's move into, because another thing we're starting to see, and I'm probably going to jump around a little bit here, but mention Common Grounds and the ability for young people not to have to go to a bar to see music or not be able to go to a bar to see music, with the addition of City Center, and being able to have that live stage in your backyard. WTSQ is now, of course,
our new backyard.
New backyard,
yes.
Yeah. We're going to back up to the other stuff earlier than that, but I just want to mention that while we're thinking about this idea of having a place for young people to see live music. And of course, I want to talk about some other places too that we're going to talk about with WTSQ. But let's back up a little bit, because we did mention that now WTSQ is in the People's Building, but you were iconically in the Union Building. There it is.
Yeah. Right here, yes.
How did it all start?
So WTSQ started in 2015.
Okay.
And we've been around for 8 years now. We're getting ready to celebrate actually our 8th anniversary. And when we moved into the Union Building, it was bare bones. There was nothing there, you know, and the first floor we were on had a horrible leak, and we were afraid it ruined equipment and everything. So when we moved up to the 8th floor of the Union Building, it became our home. You know, and it was our home for 7 years.
Yeah.
And it really did it was part of our logo, and we were right there in the middle of what was going on at Live on the Levee. You know, we were the only building on the river. There is no other buildings now on the river. What used to be a flourishing area of businesses and homes and things along the river is now only the Union Building.
And it's interesting because if you look at it, for those who are kind of wondering what's the Union Building, it's right there at our riverfront levee.
At the very end of Capitol Street.
And it's this kind of loner skyscraper building now, but like you said, it wasn't always.
It wasn't that way before. Yeah. To go back and look at old photos of Charleston, it's crazy to think that that's what Charleston looked like.
Right. Yeah, and so the Union Building was your first home, but let's talk about the actual beginnings of the station, because as I mentioned at the top of the show, unique, but maybe not so unique in terms of there's more than I probably thought then.
Kind of what started us and what spurred things on is, and you and I kind of talked about this before we started the show, that there was another radio station that had started. This area did not have alternative music in terms of a radio station. You know, we had 102.7, we had Rock 105, you had V100, you had all these other styles of music that were being represented on big radio. Alternative music was kind of left out. We just didn't have a station that was doing that, whereas other big cities did. And it was through that, the first inklings of an LP radio station, which means a low power radio station, that it's only within about a 10-mile radius from where it's broadcasting. That there was a station that was started, and it was through that Chris Long said, I want to do this. And Chris Long is our founder of WTSQ, and he called up his good friend Kenny Lavender and said, you want to start a radio station? Let's start an alternative indie radio station.
Wow.
And that was how WTSQ came to be.
And as you mentioned, it was mostly Chris and Kenny, but do you recall, even in the discussions, some of the challenges that in those early kind of beginnings of creating it?
Well, with this being a nonprofit, you know, there was no funding behind this to begin with. And it's still something that we struggle with, you know, trying to make sure that we stay on the air. It's every year we do a fund drive just to make sure WTSQ stays with the programming that we have and that it becomes and grows more and more and more each year. But really a lot of that was funding, and then finding people to be on the radio too. You know, you need live DJs to be on the air. to have these shows and to engage your listeners. It can't just be just piped in music all the time. So there was always the struggles, and then equipment.
Right.
Equipment is so expensive. Trying to find the funding to do that so that we've got the things we need in order to keep this going.
One of the things that's interesting is that we were talking about alternative music, and one thing you mentioned was other cities have this, but a lot of other cities also have college towns, and
Yes.
so Charlestonians, as they're growing up and without common grounds, things like that, kind of miss the college radio atmosphere.
Yeah.
And so do you feel like WTSQ kind of fills that void as well?
We totally do.
Yeah.
And because college radio also does a really good job of telling you what's going on in the community as well.
Right.
And that is really something we've always called ourselves Charleston's cheerleader. We're letting you know about all these really awesome things that are going on in this town, letting you hear all the amazing local artists, telling you about actual artists
Right.
in town. Ian Bodie, who has designed the shirt that I'm wearing right now, it has always been a really big supporter of WTSQ since day one. And he's been involved with a lot of our different art, but we're always involving different artists too in our designs, in things that we're doing, events that we've got going on.
Yeah.
So it's really just giving that community a voice.
And I can't think of an event or art event or otherwise that WTSQ hasn't been there.
Yeah.
And oftentimes just there, not being paid to be there, but just there for the community, whether you're broadcasting or not. Yeah.
I would say in most cases, we're normally not paid to be there.
Right,
We're
right.
just there because we want to be there.
Right, and it drives home that point of community radio. And again, it's something that people can just turn it on and discover. I think it reminds me a lot of what we have again great tradition music in West Virginia. And but the other thing we have is Mountain Stage. And Mountain Stage, and everybody will tell you the same story. You go for one act,
Yes.
and you come home and you've discovered all these amazing musicians. And I feel that the same way when I turn on WTSQ.
It's exactly that way.
Yeah, you listen and you're listening and you discover like, well, who's this? And you go and you research them more and you find out who they are. And whether local or not, you find and discover great musicians.
Another cool thing, kind of following in that vein, we have a new show that we simulcast on WTSQ. It's a nationally known one on public radio and things called Democracy Now!
Oh, right, yeah.
With Amy Goodman. And we do that in the mornings, and it used to be on from 8 to 10. We'd run it twice. Now we run it from 9 to 10. We have a lot of listeners that would tune into us streaming
Right.
because we're available on our app, WTSQ app, and also WTSQ.org. So people can listen to us from all over the world. And people were tuning in for Democracy Now! And then I come on, I do the morning show Monday through Friday from 10 to noon, and they hang out with me. And I'm playing music, and I've got different themes that I do on different days of the week. And then Josh Gaffin comes on after me, and he's interviewing people from the community and playing music and things, some really popular artists from the UK. So people are hanging out with us, and they may tune in for one thing, Democracy Now!, but then they hang out with me for the morning, and then they stay and they have their lunch with Josh Gaffin. And then, so it's this very cool thing of, you tune in for one thing and you stay.
Yeah.
And then you learn, and you get to, there's maybe a new favorite band that you've picked up that we've introduced you to.
And it's funny because you being in I still call Charleston a small town. Being in a small town.
It is a small town.
Yeah, you see people walk around town with WTSQ T-shirts and bumper stickers. I mean, there's a lot of support.
And I love it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. So this 8 years, what do you think, and your time there at least, what do you think has changed or has evolved in the station with the station?
I feel that we have some really strong DJs that have been there for a long period of time. They know the music. We've got a DJ, Robbie Irby, who does Heart Smiles on Friday nights from 8 to 10, and it's all like funk and soul, and he knows all those bands. He knows them so well, and he plays all vinyl.
Wow.
We have a lot of vinyl DJs now at the station. So all of the people that are involved are very passionate about the music that they're playing. It's not just someone coming up there just for the coolness of having a radio show. They really, truly love the music they're playing for you. And I feel like that's always been a reoccurring thing, but I think it's stronger now. And I think our listener base, they hear it, they feel it, and they feel even more connected to us.
What do you think when you talk about the listener base, when you hear feedback, because I'm sure you do, what's the common theme, especially among local folks, about tuning in and what positive or negative, what have they most commonly reacted to?
They love hearing about all the local events that are going on. Every DJ has a list in front of them whenever they come in, and it's a list of what's going on that week in Charleston. And they love knowing that it doesn't matter when they tune in, who they're listening to, they're going to hear from local people in Charleston. But we're also telling you about things going on all over the world too. And we're playing bands, sometimes brand new bands that haven't even really been listened to much. We have that ability that if I go and find a song that has just come out, and this band only has 2 songs, they don't even have a full album yet, and I can play that on my show and be some of the first radio stations to actually broadcast that.
That was a question I was going to ask, is that we were talking about so much about young bands, new bands. I was going to ask you to tell a story about that, cultivating new music in Charleston, but also giving opportunities for young people, or not young people, but young bands. Can you tell a success story or some anecdotal stuff that you've had over the years?
Yeah, there was a band called Blocks, and they're from England. And Josh Gaffin of the afternoon show, which he does Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday from noon to 2. And he found them because it's still involved with a very thick UK scene. He used to live in England and is still hearing a lot of the music and things that's going on there. He heard this band Blocks, Bloxx, and he played their song on the radio. I fell in love. I'm gonna keep hitting my mic. I fell in love with the song called Curtains, and we started playing it all the time. We were their first U.S. interview that they have ever done.
Wow.
They called in the lead singer, Ophelia, and we did a whole interview with her. She was in her apartment, and she just thought it was the coolest thing. Well, then when they went on tour, about a year and a half later, we went to one of the shows, and she knew exactly who we were. She wanted to thank us for being one of the first radio stations to give them a chance in the U.S.
And now they're pretty widely known.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's great.
They're playing big, huge festivals and everything. It's very cool. Now, local bands are kind of the same way. It's harder for the local bands, I do feel, to kind of break out of West Virginia. But that's something that WTSQ is trying to play more of a key role in that. Because we do have people, again, listening all over the world, that when we're playing Mediocres, when we're playing Sasha Colette, when we're playing Tyler Childers before Tyler broke.
Right, and Sierra
Farrell,
yeah.
exactly.
And I was going to mention that I don't know as much as you do, obviously, about that kind of thing, but it seems to me like people like Tyler and Sierra, WTSQ, I think, played a role. Am I right?
Yes.
I mean, okay. I wouldn't want to say it with some confidence, but I felt that when it was happening. And that's a wonderful thing.
We're all a piece of this really large puzzle, especially as a musician gets bigger. They need every little piece of that puzzle to come together. And I really do feel like Tyler and Sierra have excelled. Their puzzle is beautiful.
Yeah,
beautiful.
absolutely.
And I love that we're some little pieces in there.
Yeah, and again, another great thing about Charleston, and we're talking quite a bit about music and things like that because of WTSQ, but Charleston has such a rich cultural history in visual art, performing arts, literary arts, and we all kind of support each other in that regard too.
Correct.
And just like you do with your visual arts, like Ian, using him, and he's been so supportive, like you mentioned. Let's talk, because we have, let's get to 2 things before we end today. Live on a Levee, which most people tuning into the show at this point knows what Live on a Levee is.
I would hope they do.
Yeah, but there's now a WTSQ night. So talk about how that first started.
So that centers around our anniversary. And I'm not sure exactly when it started at WTSQ night, but I know that we always had a relationship when we were there in the Union Building, and we were able to broadcast the shows going on at Live on the Levee every Friday night live onto WTSQ. For some of those, they would literally run a wire all the way from the 8th floor down the stairs, all the way and plugged into the soundboard. Things got a little bit more high tech for us, as the years went on.
Do you still do that, by the way?
We don't,
okay.
Unfortunately. It's harder
because of the
now
proximity.
That we've moved.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, now since we're in the People's Building in the center of downtown, we don't have that ability to have that connecting point to point.
But Live on a Levee, because of your proximity, WTSQ became very involved. And
we did. And we got WTSQ night on Live on the Levee, in which we always try to bring bands in that maybe aren't the most obvious picks to play on Live on the Levee. And we always like to back in the earlier days, bring in a big band that was somebody we were playing on our station all the time, but maybe that person might not have come to Charleston to play. You know, we had Screaming Females came, and that was a pretty big get for us and then we had Ron Gallo, we had Bodega out of New York came down. Yeah. That was the night that WTSQ got in trouble for everybody jumping and going onto the stage, but it was
I don't remember that one.
It was a very memorable night for everybody that was there.
So talk about this year, because it's coming up. First of all, when is it?
It's July 14th is WTSQ night at Live on the Levee, and then the 15th is going to be Quo Fest. So that's the WTSQ 8th anniversary weekend. For Live on the Levee, we're going to feature Dinosaur Burps and the Infidel Phonics. If people haven't seen that two as a pair, Dinosaur Burps is a duo. They call themselves the Godfathers of Rappalachia. And so it's Squeezle and Be Rude are the two people of Dinosaur Burps. And then the Infidel Phonics are members of a Huntington band called the Yeti. And they are backing them with this full, funky, full sound. So it's Dinosaur Burps with a full band.
Okay.
And then they're going to be bringing on special guests. They're going to be bringing on rappers Duck City Music. They're going to be coming on to do a couple songs with them. And then we've split our headliner. We have two Huntington artists that share multiple band members. So we've got Allie Fletcher, is going to be coming up from Huntington. She kind of coins herself as a gothic cowgirl.
Okay.
And I will tell you, she does an amazing Stevie Nicks cover that you do not want to miss. And then we also have Jim Polak is going to be playing as well. And Jim is a well-known artist, indie artist in Huntington.
And we brought a clip of his.
Yes.
So we're going to take a minute right now and check out Jim Polak. So be sure and check them out on Live on the Levee. So other thing is the QuoFest.
QuoFest.
And our headliner there is
Lung out of Cincinnati.
So we're going to check out Lung now and check them out on the QuoFest. All right, be sure to check that out. Also, who else is playing QuoFest?
QuoFest July 15th, Mark Price, Mediocres, Red Audio, and Lung.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming in and sharing all the things about WTSQ with us.
They can find all the information at WTSQ.org.
Awesome. And thank you for tuning in to Cityscope. We'll see you next time.